global report on Asia and the Americas. We're going to meet some key bankers in that region. We're going to find out about the key client trends and where we see growth going forward after what's been, let's face it, a very turbulent couple of years in the financial services industry. And joining me right now are three very, very charming guests. First of all, we have Tom McCabe. He is the Managing Director and the Global Head of Transaction Banking Services at DBS Bank. That is definitely a mouthful. And if you think that was a mouthful, Sara Joyce, Executive Managing Director and Head of International Financial Institutions and Trade Finance at BMO Financial Group. And also with us, everybody, is Francisco Aristeguieta. He is the Global Trade Services Head and the Latin America Head at Citi. Nice to have you all with us. Encantada. So let's start. Everybody, I want to start with you, Sara, if I can, first of all, because we are in North America. We've had some pretty interesting, maybe not so great news in between North America and Europe. Tell us what you see. Where is the good news, if there is any?
Well, it's true that you do have to dig for those nuggets of gold at the moment, but I think there's two promising indicators that I've seen in the recent results. One is imports of machinery and equipment by the manufacturing sector were actually up in July, and that's a sign that I think the manufacturing sector is reinvesting in productivity.
And
so that's a very positive sign.
Imports from where? From which part of the world?
There'll be imports from all around the world into the Canadian sort of central manufacturing area in the central Canada. I think the other encouraging sign, at least in the Canadian numbers, was that exports, again on a very diversified basis, were up about 4% in July, which again in a very soft economic demand picture was actually a pretty good result. The other thing I would look at is that I think the North American banks generally are in a stronger position than they were pre-crisis 2008, better capitalized, certainly much more liquid. And the last positive thing I would point at is that it's a good time to remember while you're here in Canada this week that there is life after debt. In 1993, Canada had 72% debt to GDP. We lost our AAA credit rating. We basically had some major cuts to expenditures, some additional revenues, but we managed to get our rating back in 2002. So I think it is possible. It takes a lot of hard work and some social consensus, but there is hope after the end of the tunnel.
Yes, let's hope so. Anyway, Francisco, definitely a lot of hope in your economy, if you like, the Latin American economy. We've had a few interesting pieces of news out of Brazil, though, quite recently. Do you, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, the central bank recently in Brazil cut its forecast, and the Bovespa, if you're an investor there, you're languishing now around 30% lows, down about 30%, two-year lows. So tell me, is this a blip, or are people still really excited about the Latin American economy?
Oh, I think Latin America has been benefiting from several things. The first one is we had the financial crisis in the 70s and 80s, so our regulatory structure changed way earlier than the rest of the world. That's one thing. So banks are very well capitalized, both those that operate locally and those that, like ourselves, that operate throughout the region. The other important element is that we are basically a raw material supplier to the rest of the world, and we have been benefiting from a very high commodity pricing cycle, which hasn't stopped. Even now that the world is looking pretty uncertain, prices in commodities continue to be very high. And the other thing is that we have been benefiting also from a very benign political environment in the last 10 years. So the combination of those three make a very attractive business proposition for our clients globally. Regarding Brazil, has been growing faster than expected. I think that the message that the Central Bank of Brazil is sending out by cutting the best rate for the first time is saying we are reacting and we are proactive vis-a-vis what's happening in the rest of the world. And I think if I'm an investor, that's what I want to see. I want to see regulators, stepping up front of what could happen and impact potential growth expectations.
So boil all of that you just said down for me in terms of client trends and what clients are really seeing as the growth in business, where you as a bank will assume growth in business, and then where you think things are starting to fall back a little bit.
Well, I think in general, the biggest opportunities in Latin America is manufacturing, is really building a structure to add value to those raw materials that we today export to the rest of the world. The other one is infrastructure, which there's a lot to be done, not only in Brazil, but throughout Latin America. As we see the middle class growing very fast, as we see the urbanization phenomenon progressing as it has in the last 10 years. So in general, what I see is a strong financial system. It's a strong manufacturing platform that is starting to be built with a long-term view and a competitive view. And I think, again, leveraging on a political stable environment this could be a sustainable path for growth over the next 10, 15 years.
Well, Tom, I mean, multinationals are now starting to seriously look at Latin America. Multinationals have been seriously looking at China and Asia for quite some time, but there's some few things that are going to be happening in 2012. We're expecting a change in the Chinese leadership. People are talking about maybe a Chinese hard landing. Tell me what you see in your area going forward.
Sure. Well, we're still very positive about the growth in Asia. If you recall, over the course of the last 10 years, people have been talking about how closely Asia is linked to the U.S. and Europe in terms of trade flows. What we're seeing now in the last couple of years is virtually every corporation in the world looking to Asia to drive their top-line revenue growth. Changes the types of services and partnerships that banks are doing with corporations, and also a little bit more in-depth look into the countries.
Tell us about the kinds of services and stuff that banks and clients are looking at.
Sure. Well, I would take it from two approaches. The first is from a supplier and a buyer chain. 10 years ago, you specifically talked about how do you help bring more efficiency in the manufacturing process. Today, it's about how you're helping people finance more inventories, the distributors. The other side of that is the geographies. The number of geographies that people are trying to build their revenue base from has gone outside the core cities of India and China and Indonesia into really getting in the emerging middle class in those countries.
And tell me about how it's going to affect what's happening in Europe is going to affect China, because less consumer confidence in Europe and the US, people are buying less, so that's obviously going to impact the people who are exporting to those countries, people like China and like Asia. Have you started to see changes in some of the products and services that people are asking for on your side at Asia?
Actually, the growth is now coming domestically from Asia. If you look across Asia, this year there's only 3 countries that will have a GDP growth less than 5%. And the average across Asia will be about 7.5%, almost 8% when you look at some of the big countries, population countries like Indonesia, India, and China. So the traditional banking products that have been around, the trade products for hundreds of years, but now it is domestic and intra-Asia flow versus with the Western markets.
So how are you going to make money sitting in North America then?
Well, it's an interesting time in trade finance, and I think you're seeing some interesting trends. As I think Tom mentioned, there's definitely interest in a suite of products that are denominated in RMB, so that our North American clients are able to contract and perhaps negotiate a better price and be able to use those products. We're already seeing interest at the Asian end among our bank clients being able to borrow and finance trade in that currency. The other trend I'm seeing is definitely interest in all kinds of payables finance programs, things that might allow a buyer to extend out his days payable. And we're looking at a trend towards moving some of those programs down to a mid-sized company from a very large corporate. So those are some of the trends that I'm seeing at the moment.
Give me some more of your ideas and thoughts of what you've been hearing here so far today.
Well, there are several things that are of interest in Latin America which are new. I think that as of the last 4 or 5 years, what we've seen is an intra-regional amount of investment going from Brazil into Central America, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, or Colombia, and vice versa. And that internal flow within Latin America is new, and it's very attractive, and they really need a partner, a financial partner, to take them through a complex region that has very different regulatory environments in each. So there's a unique opportunity to transfer knowledge, capacities, and technology within the region. And also there's another interesting trend, which is the south-south flows of trade. And what we're seeing today is that the amount of trade going from South America to Asia has increased dramatically. Just an example, Brazil today exports 17% of Brazilian exports go to BRIC, whereas before the crisis was around 8%. So that gives you a little bit of how the flows are moving today, and certainly how they will evolve in the next 10 years.
And you're seeing this from your end, Tom, in terms of products and services.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, but it's going to be difficult for you because they're sort of bypassing you.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. And one of the trends we're seeing is with the U.S. demand so in such a slump, we're seeing an increased focus on diversification of exports. So you really are seeing even very small companies looking at emerging markets for their growth. They're looking at markets where the currencies are also strong, so that our high dollar is not such a disadvantage. And so far, it seems to be successful. We're really seeing, even trade with Asia is up from about 2.5% to about 11% last year. So I mean, it is moving generally in the right direction. And definitely, as Francisco points out, that even the North-South America's trade is definitely increasing.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us today. Tom from DBS Bank, Sara from BMO. I wouldn't possibly remember those very, very long titles, but all I can say are very important people, everybody. And Francisco Aristeguieta, ha sido un placer. Encantada. Nice to have you all with us.